American literature, something Americans in general really don't ponder on a day-to-day basis. Throughout history, authors have made their marks by telling their view on the world by means of poetry and novels that have been read from generation to generation. We decided to take a deeper look into the subject and asked 3 experts on American literature to come talk to us about the 6 subject areas of American literature's scope and sequence throughout the ages. This is their story.
During the time of 1605 through 1741, some of the main writers during this time period were Shakespeare, Anne Bradford, Jonathan Swift, and Reverend Jonathan Edwards. Some of the main writers I'll be talking about is Anne Bradford and Jonathan Edwards. First of all, Anne Bradford wrote Verses Upon the Burning of Our House, which she wrote in 1666.
The devil's number.
She also wrote To My Dear and Loving Husband in 1678. Now, this first one that she wrote, the Verses Upon the Burning of Our House, was basically about how her house burned and she realized that she needed to look to God and not her personal possessions. And To My Dear and Loving Husband was basically the ultimate love letter during this time period. Now, Reverend Jonathan Edwards wrote Sinner in the Hands of the Angry God during 1741, which was a very intense sermon that he spoke to. And the people had really not had this type of sermon before, so it was a really big turning point, which helped the Great Awakening start. Through 1607 through 1765, Jamestown was settled, and the Pilgrims also landed on America, which was the beginning of this great country. And the Great Awakening, like I mentioned earlier, began, which definitely turned America around and started to look toward God. And then the American Revolution happened, which started everything all as well. And the Constitution was written, and this just all started really building up the government and America.
Romanticism was a time period where people basically went back to nature and tried to find themselves, and authors such as Henry David Thoreau and Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, they all helped you find nature and everything and see how important it was. And the reason these people were so close to nature is because basically the taxes were too high, and so they just escaped into the woods just to kind of get away from it and be themselves. Major authors of this time period were people such as Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote The Raven, which is about a man who is basically going insane because he has lost the love of his life, and he thinks a raven is talking to him, and this raven is telling him that his love, Eleanor, will be nevermore, as he always states. And another author is Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote the classic novel The Scarlet Letter, and this is about a woman who committed the crime of adultery, which back then was a big no-no, and so she must wear the letter A on her chest for all to see what she's done. During these time periods, a lot of things happened, such as the first 10 amendments were added to the Bill of Rights because America was just a brand new country, and the population was about 5.3 million people. The Louisiana Purchase happened, which made America a lot bigger, and the War of 1812 between Britain and America was happening. Another big events that happened were the Underground Railroad, in which the slaves were going to the north to gain their freedom, and the war between the U.S. and American Indians is in progress. Britain takes over India, and imperialism is a huge thing for them. There were 2 very famous poets during this time period. Whitman wrote the acclaimed collection of poems called Leaves of Grass, in which he expressed the similarities between himself and nature, specifically leaves and everything. And Dickinson was a famous poet who writes about tragic poems of death and loss, such as her poems I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died and Because I Could Not Stop for Death. And during this time period, the Civil War was coming to an end, and it was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, in which many inventions were made, such as the telephone and the automobile.
With the fall of Romanticism really came the rise of realism. This took place between 1860 and 1914. Historical events really during this time were the Civil War, which was a major impacting characteristic in a lot of these authors' works. The end of slavery was another big event. Two people that really played political roles during this time period after slavery ended were Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who took their stance on the civil rights of blacks at this time period. Also, the Industrial Revolution was taking place, where Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell and Henry Ford were really making their place in society. The main authors of this time period were Stephen Crane, Jack London, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Mark Twain, and Louisa May Alcott. Stephen Crane wrote a book called The Red Badge of Courage, which it's a Civil War story. It follows a young boy who joins the military, and it kind of follows his struggles as he goes through the military at that time, and just shows how the Civil War tore apart the country, and just kind of focuses on his life. Also, Jack London, he wrote a lot about the wilderness and things like that, and one of his huge works was The Call of the Wild. In The Call of the Wild, it follows this dog named Buck, and it kind of shows the world from his point of view. He's a sled dog, and it kind of follows his life, and it gives a point of view from the animal's perspective into the human's domain, really. So those are the main authors of that time period. After realism, we come to a stage in literature known as the moderns, from 1914 to 1939. And this was really when the term was coined, the American Dream, which a lot of people in this time period were writing about what they viewed as a good life in America. Historically, events that took place during this literary time period were the Titanic sinking, the Panama Canal was built, immigration was at an all-time high, World War I had started, Prohibition was taking place, women gained the right to vote, and then the Great Depression happened, which was a huge thing in literature at this time period. Also, the first television broadcast was aired. Main authors during this time period were John Steinbeck, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, T.S. Eliot, Robert Frost, and Ezra Pound. John Steinbeck wrote a novel called The Grapes of Wrath. Ernest Hemingway wrote A Farewell to Arms, which it's a novel that follows an ambulance driver during World War I, and it really shows his struggles and the horrors that he met with the new warfare that was taking place in Europe. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote a novel called The Great Gatsby, and this is really about the American dream. It follows characters and their struggle through life in America at this time period, and it kind of shows the side of the rich and also the side of the poor, and how sometimes having less could be better. And those were really what occurred during that time period.
During this literary time period of 1939 through present time, World War II has begun. Germany surrenders and the United Nations is established. Senator McCarthy begins the anti-communism sentimental era. Martin Luther King also gives the speech, I Have a Dream, which is definitely a turning point in the civil rights. The U.S. landed on the moon, and the Soviet Union dissolved. And also a major event in this time period was the 9/11. Some of the major authors of this time period was Tim O'Brien and Alice Walker. Tim O'Brien wrote The Things They Carried, which was a memoir about the Vietnam War. And Alice Walker wrote The Color Purple, which was about the struggles of black life during this time.
Well, Romanticism.
You didn't wait very long.
It's upside down.
It was really where the term the American dang it built. Dang it!
War can be
The largest number of children born to one woman is recorded at 69. What? 16 sets of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets.
Why would you do that to your
She has nothing else to do, I guess.
Well, she's like a prostitute. 1939 through present time is. Let's start over again because I'm totally screwed that up.
Okay.